All right. Awesome. So I'll just pick it up where we left off and let's see how it goes. So, Viloshni, so as I said, I watched your TED Talk and you were talking about the different types of intimacy in it. So could you please describe to us just in simple terms, what is intimacy and why is it important for us to know what the different types are?
Okay, great. So basically, I mean, in simple terms, intimacy is a bond that is created between people. And it would differ on the type of relationships. A mother and child would have a very different bond to a husband and wife, and also to, an individual in terms of their religious beliefs with God, etc. So the different types of intimacy that you have mentioned is key to human development.
Okay.
Okay, so when we start from in utero to the end of our journey through life, we thrive on intimacy, and intimacy is often mistaken to be sex.
Okay.
Intimacy is not sex.
Yeah.
So the different types of intimacy that you do get are emotional intimacy, where a person would just share feelings openly, regardless of whether it is positive or negative emotions that they're getting out. Then we have intellectual intimacy, where we share ideas and opinions. And I think to thrive as humans, it is increasingly important for us to engage in sharing our opinion, in sharing our opinions, also being able to debate, our points of view, provided there is, respect. And then the being sensual and sexual is a form of physical intimacy.
Yeah.
So, and that's where a couple bonds through the activity
Yeah.
of, being sexual.
Absolutely. I think you made a good point about making a clear distinction that intimacy doesn't necessarily mean sex, for example, and it's just a form of intimacy that you share with your partner. So I was curious when it comes to relationships. Now, everyone has different views, everyone has different perspectives on relationships. And me and my friends have been having this debate about what comes first in a relationship. Is it love or is it understanding? Now, this is my answer. I believe love, I think they both play into each other. But if you're going to ask me what comes first, I would say love, because I think it's easier for you to develop feelings of loving someone without, let's say, truly fully understanding them. And of course, over time, the more you understand the person, the more you love them. But there's others that will say, actually, you need to, in order to love someone, you need to understand them. So understanding comes first. So I don't know which answer is right. That's just my point of view. I'm curious to hear, what would you say? What do you think?
Yeah, so I mean, I think you're very right that everyone will have different views about it, because love, sex, and relationships. There's just everyone has their own mindset about how things should be, work, etc. To answer your question, with me, it would be understanding,
Okay.
because I think through understanding, the love is developed, because people are different, people are raised differently, people have different values, standards, etc. And these things play a huge role in love,
For sure.
and especially where love has to be consistent, and to get a relationship to actually to last, which is quite a it's quite tricky wherever you go in the world. Relationships are so rocky, marriages are so rocky. I mean, divorce rates are at an all-time high. So that is my view, but obviously, I mean, with all due respect to your view as well.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay, I see. I see the other side. I totally get where you're coming from, and it does. I do agree with it at the same time. It's just I would see it differently, but I think at the end of the day they both play into each other either way. But you said something just now that was a very valid point, that divorce rates right now are so high. Now, I I don't know what the answer is. I have a theory. I think let's say our parents' generation, for example, or so on, you there was society operated in a certain way. It wasn't as open as we are now. We don't have access to as much information, and especially now with things like dating apps and all that kind of stuff. Now you have potentially an endless potential, partners at your fingertips. So now there's that. Okay, if I'm not happy here, it's not going to be very hard to like get not necessarily a relationship, but maybe some a physical aspect, somewhere else. So what do you think is the reason divorce rates are so high now? Is it because now we're aware that there's so much choice and so much choice available to us, or is it because maybe people see marriage differently now and they see it as, obviously it's supposed to be forever, but it's almost like until maybe things go terribly wrong, it's not forever. It's until things hit the fan, for example. What would you say?
Mm. So I have two views about this. The
Okay.
one is that I think more and more people are starting to realize their worth, and they realize that, if this is not working out for me, then, after attempts to try and live, harmoniously, and that is not working out, then they step away, um, you know, from relationships. And the other view is that, it could be almost like, that people just don't have the patience to work things out, because there are ways and means to work things out. So the one may sound like it is, contradicting the other point, but those are, very realistic views in terms of what I've experienced, speaking to people, to friends, to associates of mine. And this has got nothing to do with, the clients that I see, but
Sure.
this is exactly what I've picked up. So yeah.
Okay, so it's two things. It's about people now are becoming more aware of their self-worth, and that now people there's almost maybe a lack of patience sometimes to work things out, because there's other potentials out there. And do you think
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. And I think also, the impatience comes in because everybody wants things like yesterday.
Yeah.
It's no longer, and it's no longer about, I need to work towards this. So unfortunately, yeah, and I think that's also just the times of the world. If you put it that way, in terms of what people see, social media, they get these images that, life is perfect out there. Nothing's perfect out there. We need to make it perfect.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think like you made a very good point about social media. I think does play a big role, because you see the people who have the whatever that life that you have, but that's the only thing you see on social media. You don't see what's behind that, and what, like, in a relationship, what are the challenges that they go through, what are the fights, what are the things that you're actually like working on. It's like, oh yeah, everything's great, me and my partner, we're happy, this is what you should aspire to be. So I totally resonate with that. And I remember you said something in your talk, and this is something that I've heard before as well, that relationships are one of the most important factors to your overall well-being as a person. And someone once told me that the quality of your life is determined by the quality of your relationships. Now, I'm curious to hear what's your reasoning behind that, and why is that so important for us to have, I guess, the relationships that we want in our life, and the ones that are healthy for us, and the ones that are good for us, for example.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, I mean, everyone also would have their own view on this, but my personal view on relationships, providing your overall well-being, your mental well-being as well, because it contributes highly towards that, is that, relationships provide a sense of structure, sense of security, And also, peace of mind, basically, which contributes to the mental well-being. And people are able, when they are in harmonious relationships, and when I say harmonious, I'm not saying that there is no room for arguments, for disagreements, etc., because these are normal ways in a relationship for two people to grow in understanding to each other, because I think that just happens throughout. You never get to completely and fully understand someone when you start dating or when you just get married. So it allows you to actually focus on aspirations, on goals. It clears your mind, and I mean, if you just focus on on someone, or should I say, compare two couples, a couple who's really disconnected from each other. You pick it up in their body language. You will see that they are not. You can have a conversation with them, but they're not focused. They will lose track of what is happening in that conversation. If you see them at the workplace, they will not give their all into their work, because what ends up happening is that their diet gets impacted, where they will start skipping meals. They wouldn't take care of themselves, uh, so they're not able to give off themselves. And I think love is a very it's a major ingredient in our lives. Absolutely. To thrive. And without it, you become a wreck. You become a wreck. I've also been through a very rocky marriage. So from personal experience as well, in terms of your mind just gets taken over by toxicity. That's what basically happens.
Yeah. I think you made a good point about, especially when a relationship it's not harmonious, as you put it, that you can vibe. I've always surprised how people can just vibe off each other. You could look at someone, or whether it's a close friend or a partner, and you could, just from feeling, you'll get the vibe that, okay, there's something's not right there. There's something a bit off. Even as an outside viewer, maybe you don't know the full story, but you can get that vibe. And I think, like you said, when a relationship does turn into something, quite toxic, and you're kind of stuck in it, and you're trying to figure out where to go, it affects all parts of your life. I've been there before, when I was in something that wasn't great, and it did affect my mental health. It did affect how I would speak to my friends. It did affect how I thought of myself as well. So you're 100% right. It does affect so many aspects of your life that maybe you're not even aware of. But you said something which I agree with, that you said we need love in our lives to thrive, right? So I don't know if anyone has an answer to this question, and everyone will have a different perspective and a different thing on this question, but let's play this out. So the whole saying, the common saying that love is blind, right? Do you agree with that? Do you not? Is there more to it? Or and how would you describe love? Someone has asked me that once, and I told them, I honestly don't know. It's very hard to put into words, and maybe it shouldn't be put into words, but let's see if we can.
Let's try.
Yeah.
So I think just on the first part of the question, in terms of love is blind, I think it's a reality. We humans, but we're also conditioned a certain way. What is love for us is always what we see as beautiful, and something that we attracted to. And that actually starts off as love, to be really honest. And, as much as love is blind sounds like very romantic and sexy and that sort of thing, I'm not sure that it is something that can last, because basically what's happening is that you're just looking at the facade. You're just looking at the, what is it that you can see? What is it that you can relate with? But you're not really going into, deeper levels of what is required.
Mm.
So that could be a bit misleading. Um, just to get to the second part of your question in terms of what is love, it's my belief that love is a feeling, and it's basically it's a feeling of that grows through familiarity,
Okay.
and it grows with all the other ingredients that you add, um, in terms of trust. And if you look at it, it's like either building a house or following a recipe. So you have to have the right ingredients to get the perfect cake, or you have to get the foundation right to actually get the house to be, solid and to be standing for many years.
Mm.
So that's exactly how relationships are built. And that's how we need to look at it. There's no just one ingredient like great sex that's going to keep a marriage together or keep a relationship together. There's all of these different components that have to come together and work for you. And I think the one, very important thing for me is consistency, being able to show up all the time, not just kind of saying, I love you, but, saying words and doing, doing things and showing more than telling um, carries a lot of weight.
Absolutely. And I love the analogy you used about the cake and house. And I agree. I think that's a very good way to look at it. And like you said, love is not one thing. There's so many ingredients that come into play for a relationship to last and to be successful. But I think this is something that I've experienced in the past, and I think a lot of people do sometimes as well. I think a lot I've experienced, for example, like you think you love someone, but then like as I got older and moved on and so on, and I look back, I'm like that wasn't love, that was infatuation. And I think there's a thin line between the two because they do feel similar, but
Similar, yeah.
they do. So how would you describe the difference? How do I know, like, if someone asks you, like, Viloshni, I don't know if I love this person or am I just infatuated with them? How would you try to figure out which of it would be?
It's extremely difficult to do that because you would not know what the next person is feeling. And in that moment, their feelings could be really real. And it's also it's not right to actually discourage them. Um, so there's certain things that they would need to do. So for example, if I was coaching, a client, there would be certain ways that I would have to say to them that this would be their next steps in the relationship to actually test whether or not it is, and not really uh, test the next person, but to test themselves to know whether or not, because if you are in love, you want to spend your every minute life with that person. You want to grow and develop with that person. You want to achieve things together, and it also has to be the right match for you. And sometimes, at the beginning, you're not able to make that differentiation until you go a bit further into getting to know each other, understand each other. Also, values, principles, etc., play a very big role in that. Because if this is a relationship that you're getting into, that you want to build a family, with this person, and because you see an everlasting sort of relationship with this person, then there's firstly, you would need to know what is it that you're looking for in that person. And if that person matches all of what you want, and maybe some areas they don't, but with love, there's compromise as well. So yeah, so just outright being able to tell someone to differentiate between love and infatuation it is difficult.
Yeah, no, and that makes sense. But I think you
Uh,
made a great point about testing, and not necessarily testing the other person, but testing yourself to to really try to figure out which of the two it is. And I think in a relationship, I think it's normal that you're always testing each other, but not in a it's not in a malicious way, or it's not in a negative way. It's
Yeah.
not like, oh, will they do this? If not, I'll be upset. But you do little things to understand, okay, this is how they reacted in this situation. This is how I felt and when they did this. So is it important in a relationship to always be on some level testing each other and challenging each other? Or, like we said, I think at the beginning when you're courting someone,
Yeah, I think, yeah. So definitely, I think challenge is always good. It keeps things fresh. It keeps things, going. It keeps it at a high level. It also prevents boredom, because I think once you get into that cycle of familiarity with each other, you can go into that comfort level and then slip into boredom.
yeah.
And then the danger part is that you look for excitement somewhere else.
Exactly, exactly, and I think
Yeah.
that's a very good point. I once heard, so in my training, one of our things was about love and relationships, and she said that what keeps a relationship going in the long term, there's two things. You have best friend chemistry, and then you have physical chemistry. So, and obviously physical chemistry, as time goes on, as you become, like you said, more familiar with each other, there's ups and downs. It's like a roller coaster. But what keeps a relationship going and lasting, the test of time, is having that best friend chemistry, that this person is your best friend. So on that point, do you think your partner, or your wife or husband, for example, do they have to be your best friend for it to work, or is that not necessarily the case?
Well, I think to some degree you have to be friends,
Yeah.
but not necessarily your best friend. I think it's
Okay.
perfectly normal to have, a circle of friends that either are, known to each other, or not even, doesn't necessarily have to be, liked by each other. But obviously, as relationships develop, they kind of become a couple's friends, not just, the one's friend or the other's friends.
Sure.
So it is a healthy way to be friends with each other, firstly, because if you're not friends with each other, then you're not having fun together,
True. True.
because that's what relationships are about. It's like every kind of aspect of life that you kind of share together.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. No, that's a very good point. So this is something, I have another question for you. So this is something that me and my fiance have discussed early when we first started dating, was the concept of soulmates. Now, I've never really, I've been on the fence. I'm like, it sounds great, but if I'm being, I guess, practical, that you could potentially have throughout your life many different soulmates, and they might not be the person that you end up with. So, how would you do you believe in soulmates? Do you believe that there's that this one person for you, and this is the person you're meant to spend the rest of your life with? Or is it that you've chosen this person, and there could be potentially, there's billions of people in the world, that there are other potential suitors that you could have ended up with?
So I've been reading a bit on soulmates,
Okay.
and like my understanding of it is that it doesn't necessarily have to be the person that that you choose to be your partner. That could be your soulmate. They say that your soulmate could be a friend, it could be your child, it could be a parent. So I haven't I haven't dwelt much into it, to be really honest with you. But
Sure.
just from what I've kind of read up on. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough. I guess
yeah.
more information, more research needed before we can get a better understanding of that. I wanted to
Yeah.
move on to the concept of marriage. Now, I wanted to, as you mentioned earlier, divorce rates are quite high. So I wanted to get your thoughts on, I guess, what your perspective is on the current marriage situation we have in the world today, and do you and then I have a follow up question, which is, do you think as a relationship progresses that there have to be some changes? For example, going from, for example, boyfriend and girlfriend to becoming, engaged and fiancés, and going from that and then becoming, a husband and a wife. Do you think at each stage of the relationship things have to not necessarily change between, like, not the your personal relationship with each other, but maybe your expectations, your priorities, the way you think about where you are now, and the direction you're going, for example.
Yeah. That's a great question. So ideally, ideally, things should not change.
Okay.
However, I think the relationship should take its course as it progresses, because there is a point of the relationship where there's euphoria, and that kind of slowly kind of fizzles out. And I believe that a couple can actually keep that going, and the way they can keep that going is that you know at the beginning of the relationship, when they get together as as a couple, as two people that are interested in each other,
Yeah.
they can agree on what is it that we want out of this relationship, and come to an agreement on almost like a contract, but basically it's just an agreement between two people. And I think it's really a good way of um, kind of achieving the goals that you want in your relationship. And as you move to the next step of your relationship, when you get a bit more serious, and then when you get to the point of becoming engaged, becoming married, obviously this gets re-looked at and it gets adjusted
Mm.
to meet the requirements of the different part of the journey. And the reason why I say that this, and I highly recommend this, is because it's almost like it is a love agreement between yourself and your partner. And if you both want the same things out of life, you're going to achieve it.
Mm.
And you're going to be able to go back to this document to actually do a check-in. It also makes, for when you do get married, in terms of agreeing things like how many kids do you want to have? Do you want to have any pets? What happens to the assets? Who's responsible for that? In terms of accountability and responsibility, it's all documented. And when the relationship, God forbid, comes to the end,
Mm.
it also helps as a guide in terms of how do you deal with it. It can also help as a guide in terms of if you have quite a serious um, altercation between each other, misunderstanding, and you can actually set out the rules in terms of, if we do have a fight, this is how we're going to deal with it, and based on personal preferences, because these are two different individuals that are coming together. And you may want to not go to bed until this is resolved. Your partner, on the other hand, may need a day or two to cool off. So listing the cooling off period, if after so many hours still not resolved, what do we do next? So basically it can be anything that you both want it to be.
Yeah. I think you made a great point about right when like at the beginning of your relationship, setting out, what do we want out of this? What do we see? Although I think maybe in the beginning that might be hard to do because you're still new and you don't really maybe know each other well enough to fully answer that question, correctly, until maybe
Yeah.
you're both comfortable that there's security and we are together, we are together. This is a relationship, and then maybe we can have those conversations. But I think, like you said, having at least something that you both, so, and if you're both going towards the same thing, that's great. But as you move through different stages of the relationship, you know, and like you said, when things get more serious, revisiting that, and now putting in, okay, now that we are here, what are the new things that we'd want? Are there things from the past that we want to remove? Are there things that we want to add? What are the new, you know, rules we want to have for each other? What are the new expectations we want to have for each other? So I think having those checkpoints and having something to look back to is great advice, and I, guys, highly recommend it to to everyone. That's actually really really good advice. Um, on As you know, like, and you mentioned this earlier, every relationship is different. Now, on paper, you could have two people. On paper, they look fantastic. These guys, all the requirements, shall we say, fit these guys, and all the requirements fit these guys as well. But this relationship works, and this doesn't work, even though on paper everything looks the same. So there's every relationship is different and has its own dynamic. So I'm curious, what, from your perspective and as a coach, if I ask you, what would be a good framework to lay a foundation for a good relationship? What are the kind of building blocks that need to be there for to give us the best chance of this being successful?
So I think firstly, it's just about knowing yourself, understanding yourself, loving yourself.
Okay.
Because if that happens, you're not going to be dependent on your partner to make you feel valued, or depending on your partner to make you feel loved or
Yeah.
to make you happy, because that's where a lot of issues start. Just from those, and as petty as it may sound, but that's where a lot of the problems actually start. So, you know, the other elements that are extremely important is communication, is trust. It's being able to compromise, being able to be consistent, and to show up every day. I think, you know, those are extremely important. And I know, you know, some people say consistency can become boring. Consistency doesn't need to be boring.
True.
And you know, you need to find ways, because you know, that's when doubt settles in, is when the consistency starts to fall away, by you not showing up. That also falls away. We we live in a very fast-paced world. We live with lots going on around us, and we can get caught up in that. And then we also tend to take it into our relationships. So it's very important for us to actually be present when we are present. And it doesn't require us to be present for, you know, if it is that we have 4 hours in the afternoon or evening or together, that we need to be present for the entire 4 hours. That can also be agreement in terms of, for this period of time, this is what I need to do. But our dinner time and this time, you know, straight after dinner, is going to be dedicated for us to be together. And this is something that, like I, you know, spoke about the love agreement. It can be also one of the things that's discussed there. And then I think the ability to be able to explore together. And when I say this, I mean, you know, exploring in the bedroom, exploring where food is concerned, you know, cooking different dishes together, or baking, you know, when it comes to certain festivals, or, you know, any celebration, also activities, you know, because these are things that as humans we thrive on. And you know, after what we all have been through with the lockdowns and all the restrictions that were put on us, we realized the importance of, you know, how much of interaction we actually require as humans, to thrive. And you know, it could be travel, it could be, you know, once the world starts opening up again, it could be really different elements. And there's so many ways as well that, you know, even if you're just indoors, that you could have fun together, you could explore together, you know, with games. And so the list actually becomes endless in terms of what can be done. However, I think these are the main components, and I'm not too sure if I mentioned the word fun, but that is also one of the things that actually laughing, just laughing, even watching a comedy and laughing together, it's just so good for the soul.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I think you touched on a lot of good points about. I really love how you talked about just the last point you just said. Just fun. I think that's something that when we talk about these things, we forget to add, like, which is the simplest thing, is what you want in a relationship. You want to explore, whether it's food, whether it's travel, whether you want to have life experiences together, and that's how you develop a stronger bond and so on. And of course, communication is super important. And like you said, I think what I've taken in from our conversation so far is the importance of, I guess, just talking and setting things out so you have like a guideline in the relationship. Obviously, it's not like a strict thing, but it's something that's
Yeah.
fluid. So if something goes wrong, if we have a challenge, if there's something we can't decide on, what have we agreed on together to address these kind of things? Because I think when you have that, it helps give you maybe more stability and security in the relationship.
Absolutely. And it also gives you almost like a structured approach as much as I understand that, as humans, we don't want to be structured, but when we do get into these type of, how can I say, roadblocks, if we can
Sure.
call it that,
Yeah.
instead of us detouring, we have some sort of structure in terms of, let's see how can we handle this best together. Because if that's what both of you want, then why not, have a structured approach instead of just trying to off the cuff, just try to deal with it individually. Because
Yeah.
at that point, it's also not going to be the best approach because your mindset is not going to be in a, it's not going to be calm. You're not going to be thinking properly. You're not going to also applying yourself, because it's almost like you're feeding the ego at that point when you're
Yeah.
trying to resolve it.
Absolutely. And I think you made such a good point about mindset and how this structured approach can help. Because I know, even in my experience, sometimes when maybe you guys are having a disagreement, for example, and you're not, and it's something maybe that you haven't had a disagreement on before, so you don't really know what to do about it. I've noticed that you get so caught up in, like, your situation and like how you're feeling and how this situation is affecting you, that you sometimes forget to take into account how do they see it, what's their perspective on the situation, maybe. And then usually when you hear their perspective, doesn't mean it's resolved, but it definitely tones everything down a lot, because you can sit down and be like, oh, okay, I had no idea that's how you felt. I had no idea that's how you saw the situation, and that's how you were feeling about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's super good advice. That's really, really useful. I think one thing we haven't talked about yet, which I'm sure you'd agree is a huge part of a relationship, but comes with its own challenges, is vulnerability. Now, vulnerability, I think there's two types. There's your vulnerability in your relationship with your partner, and there's your vulnerability in your relationship with yourself. And I it's tricky sometimes to combine those two, because if you're not very vulnerable with yourself, it might cause challenges for you to be vulnerable in a relationship, or being in a relationship might make you vulnerable in that sense, but you're still not truly being vulnerable with yourself. So how would you describe vulnerability in your own words, and why is it so important in a relationship?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it is such a key ingredient as well. The difficulty with vulnerability is that not everyone is able to be vulnerable. And honestly, I don't know what it is, but it's almost like they put up, it could be past experiences. It could be, that they not trusting enough, that they almost put up a blockage from allowing themselves to become vulnerable. And just to tell you what my understanding of vulnerability is that it's just being able to be open and transparent. And I think more so to your significant other than to the world.
Yeah,
Um, because what happens is that, especially with the significant other, things that we hold back, things that we kind of try to suppress, has a way of coming up. It resurfaces, and it resurfaces, it explodes,
absolutely.
and the damage that gets done from that could be irreparable. Whereas, if it, regardless of what it is, if you were able to let it out at the appropriate time, you would be able to better deal with it than to to try and suppress and then just let it take its course.
Yeah. I think you made a great point about it's actually probably more important to somehow, if you're not a vulnerable person naturally, to do that with your significant other, because the things that you're not maybe addressing yourself will, like you said, could show up in the relationship, which might have nothing to do with your partner, but there's a lot of baggage that you're carrying with you that now that you have a space, so to speak, to let it go, like you said, the damage could be irreparable. And I think this is something I always tell my fiance. I'm like, it's so, because I'm going to generalize here. Men, in general, typically are not the most vulnerable people, typically.
Mm.
So I have very close relationships with all my friends, and we do have deep conversations. But there are still parts that we all know that, yeah, this is not to be discussed without even saying anything. Everyone knows that this is, for example, an area not to be discussed. So when I look at like my friends and their partners and like mine, I always look. I'm like, no matter how much I know my friend, there's a side that only your partner is gonna know about you. And I think, and I always find that so interesting because I'm curious. I'm like, what don't I know? What's what's hiding behind that? But I think that's how it should be. I think your partner should have maybe, let's say the word access, or some deeper knowledge about you that not necessarily everyone else should have. What would you say?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Because at, that is the person that you're trusting the most. This is the person that you've decided to, take this journey with. Nobody else, nobody else actually matters as much as your partner does to you. Um, Once you become serious about each other, because everything else is there, your parents, everyone else, the circle of friends, all of that is still there, but they don't matter. Their level of importance actually decreases. And where your partner's concerned, it increases. So I 100% agree with you. That's basically how it should be.
Yeah, no, for sure, for sure. And do you think that, because this is another question that comes up, is there a time in a relationship to be vulnerable? So some people might tell you like, oh, maybe you shouldn't say that like right at the beginning of a relationship where you're still getting to know each other. You shouldn't be that vulnerable. My philosophy has always been, and being vulnerable, there's a clear distinction. I'm not saying I'm not gonna sit here and tell you my deepest, like darkest secrets. No, that's not what it's about. But my rule or my process was always, I'm just gonna be 100% myself. I'm be very vulnerable to the things I want to be vulnerable about, and whether it's too early, whether it's not, for me, if it's too early, okay, then definitely you're not, like, it's almost like it gives me the answer that I need, because I'm like, are you comfortable with something like this? Do you accept me as I am and my opinions and my views? Okay, if you do, then let's see what else, let's see where this goes. If not, it's like, okay, fine, you're not the it's not supposed to happen, and that's perfectly fine. So do you think, is it, I don't think there's no right or wrong, but what would,
Mm.
if I was coming to you and I was your client, I was like, Viloshni, I don't know what to do. Should I be this is vulnerable. It's only been our third date, for example, or should I maybe not say this yet? What would you say?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I would say that what needs to happen is that you would need to kind of be sure that this is the person that you're going to be serious about. And if you're not serious by the third date, which is highly unlikely, but it also depends on the age group, because someone who's been in a relationship before, been in a marriage before, and has now met someone new, depending on their life stage. The third date could actually be, you know, going into a serious relationship where they've both realized at this
Mm,
point that they want to be serious about each other. So, it could apply differently to different people. However, if you are going into a serious relationship, it is advisable that you do speak the truth, because
yeah.
vulnerability is really being open, being just putting your cards out there. For example, and I'm going to use this as an example, and perhaps it's not the ideal example, but if a person has been on drugs and suffered a battle, lost a relationship, lost everything because of this addiction, then it is appropriate, if you are going into a serious relationship, to talk about it.
Mm,
Because if something like that has to resurface, that could be a deal breaker for the
absolutely.
other person, especially if you have not spoken about and agreed to what is it that is what is it that is acceptable, what are deal breakers, what are my boundaries, those type of things. So yeah, so I hope that answers the question. But I think also it's just, sometimes we just don't trust our gut enough, and just relying on getting a gut feel, because a lot of the times that we want, nothing can be really scientific in terms of,
Yeah.
this would be the right time. Or so we are programmed to be able to know what is good for us and what is not. We're just not intuitive enough, or
Two.
we
Yeah.
don't. Maybe I should rephrase that. Maybe it's not that we're not intuitive enough. It's we do not rely on our intuition enough.
Yeah. 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 For
And
sure.
we tend to ignore those signs and symptoms.
I think that's a very very good point. Everyone always talks about gut feeling, and when you speak to like friends or people about, oh, like I started dating this person, and then like it didn't work out later on, wherever the time frame was, but and they think back to that like first day, and you're like, yeah, like I felt it in my gut, but I was like, it's fine, I'm sure it's wrong, but it's a great point. It's not about not listening to it, it's maybe not necessarily trusting it, which does say it's a
Mm,
skill. It takes time to develop that and to understand that and to understand yourself, and like to be like, okay, yeah, I know this time, like, yeah, this is not something I should do, or this something, oh yeah, absolutely, I definitely should do this. So I think you make a great point there. um Veloshni, I want to be conscious of our time, so just have a couple more questions for you. But I was
okay.
curious, could you tell us just, with I know you're a love coach and so on. So if how do you typically work with your clients? Is it coaching sessions? Is it individuals? Is it couples? How does that work?
So basically, I work with my clients online.
Okay.
Um, so location is not an issue, because all my business, even locally, is conducted online.
Okay.
I do one-on-one coaching. I do couples coaching. I also do workshops. So workshops on different aspects of sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's designed on level of understanding,
Sure.
and yeah, so it's not where you just go in and it's a video. So I conduct the workshop myself for an hour long with the individual.
Okay, okay, that's really interesting that majority of it is online, but that's also a huge benefit because, like you said, you can have clients all over the world.
Yeah.
And I know your background is in management, and you have over 25 years in that. So, what made you go from management, 25 years corporate, I guess the corporate world, to love coach. It's a complete, 180. So what made you decide to go down that route? And I know you mentioned earlier that your your goal is to empower, men and women to, have better relationships and improve their love lives and so on. So, but what made you decide to make that transition? I'm curious.
Yeah. So for me, it's always been a passion. It is
Okay.
something that I wanted to do. And now it's just like getting to live my purpose. But I think it's, a big, a big deciding factor for me is that my experience in terms of what I went through, also experiencing liberation
Mm,
and, in South Africa, we've got such high stats for gender-based violence, sadly. Um, and I just feel that, people can make such a difference in their relationships because this is not just about two individuals. This spins off onto kids, onto, generations to come.
for sure.
There's just so much of it, so much of a difference I feel that can be made with regards to gender-based violence, with regards to sexual health, because HIV/AIDS is also a big factor, and this is not just restricted to South Africa. It's globally,
Yeah.
both of these factors.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm so glad to hear that you decided to turn that passion into, your full time thing now. And I made a career change as well, going from sales to, therapy and what I'm doing now. And I think similar to you, I think you would resonate with this, that the difference between, for example, me hitting my target and the feeling I get, or you maybe, I don't know, closing a great quarter, at the office, compared to helping someone else in their lives in a positive way, mine with therapy and you with love, I feel incredibly fulfilled when I have that experience.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. And yeah, it's a beautiful thing. And for my last two questions, Viloshni, these are questions I ask all my guests, and I didn't put them on the thing on purpose because I like guests to actually, answer them in how they truly feel. So the first question is, looking back, I guess either at your career or your personal life, whatever the case might be, what are you most proud of for yourself?
My daughters, my three daughters. I think I've just been blessed with motherhood, the whole experience, raising them, just seeing them shape into adult humans.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's really, really
Yeah.
beautiful. Yeah, no, and I don't have kids, but I can definitely understand understand that for sure. And
Yeah.
for my last question, Viloshni, what is the message you'd like everyone to take home with them today?
Um, I think there's so many messages, but if you feel you're not living your purpose, find your purpose and live it, because each of us have been given a gift to give to the world, and you need to find that.
Absolutely. I think that's a beautiful way to end the podcast and such a beautiful message. I think so many people could relate to that. Viloshni, I wanted to say thank you so much for coming on the show today. This has been such a fun conversation. I love this topic. I could talk about this for days if we had the time. Um,
Yeah.
before we round off, where can people find you if they want to connect with you? LinkedIn, what is it? Let us know where we can find you.
Okay, great. So you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm Viloshni Moodley. You can also find me on social media. My company is Ultimacy Online.
Okay.
And then my website is www.ultimacy.online.
Perfect, perfect. So, guys, everyone listening,
Yeah.
if you're looking for a coach for your relationship, if you're a couple, or if you're an individual, wherever the case might be, please make sure to reach out to Viloshni. She's awesome and clearly, would be the right coach for you. I think she would have been a great coach for me once upon a time, but we don't need that anymore. Um, And to everyone, guys, thank you so much for listening. Please subscribe and follow the podcast on Instagram. You can find me on every platform, Spotify, Apple, at hope.it.helps. And Viloshni, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Khalid.
Thank you. And to everyone, guys, as always, thank you so much. Hope it helps. Peace.